If you've been following my blog for any length of time, you'll know that I'm the driving force behind many of the additions that we have on our urban homestead. I'm the reason we put in a garden, and the reason we have a bunny living in that garden. I'm the reason we got the initial 3 Speckled Sussex hens in 2018. My husband Everett is usually the voice of reason in these things. So when he decided in April to come to me and say, "Honey, I think we need to get more chickens," I did what any self-respecting chicken enthusiast would do. I smiled at him and said, "Honey, that's a great idea. We should do that." Admittedly, this is the first time I've ever tried to integrate chickens into an existing flock, even a small one. And I am by no means an expert, but I knew that because I love my girls, that I wanted things to be as painless as possible for the pullets, the hens, and for the humans. My first step was to consider the composition of my flock as it stood. My Speckled Sussexes, Margaret, Lilibet, and Wallace Simpson, are incredibly docile, sweet, and pleasant chickens to be around. I didn't want them to suffer any ill effects from aggressive coop mates. I did not want to see any of the political posturing that you sometimes see when you introduce new chickens. I didn't want the new chickens to get bullied, although I didn't see any possibility of that really happening because, again, Wallace Simpson, Margaret, and Lilibet are very sweet chickens. We ended up going with the Buff Orpington because the Buff Orpington is known for having some of the similar qualities to the Speckled Sussex. They are sweet, friendly, and generally charming little birds. We thought that this would be a good first step to making sure that our integration was smooth. Once we had a breed in mind, we had another decision to make: how many chickens to get. And that was something we had to carefully consider. We didn't want to get too many because we have a small backyard. We also didn't want to get too few. Chickens require a period of quarantine after you bring them into your life, 2 to 4 weeks generally, and the idea of quarantining a chicken all by herself seemed kind of sad. Plus, we didn't want to introduce a lone chicken to an existing flock. We figured that could lead to some issues. So we decided initially to get 2 hens, point of lay, ready to go. Except the great poultry buying panic of 2020 happened, and all of a sudden chickens and chicks were like the toilet paper or sanitizer. You couldn't find them anywhere. And if you could find them, they were like concert tickets. You had to line up in a row at the feed store in hopes that you would get to walk away with your chickens. We decided to get brooded chicks since that was what we could get. And all of a sudden, 2 turned into 3. Because as Everett pointed out, baby chick mortality is higher than full-grown chicken mortality. And we didn't want a baby chick to be raised by itself if something bad were to happen. 2 became 3, and we ended up with Clementine, Jenny, and Marigold. Step 3 was controlled exposure. When Jenny, Clementine, and Marigold got old enough, about 5 weeks, we started bringing them out on a daily basis. For the next 4 weeks, every day, they came out for at least a few hours. And the chickens pretty much regarded themselves through the fence. The girls were in Folsom Prison, the big girls, because that's where chickens that eat zucchini plants go, is Folsom Prison. The little girls were inside their baby nursery run, as we began to call it. That lasted for about 5 weeks. At about 9 weeks, we moved the girls out permanently. They just got too big for the brooder box. My sewing room started to stink. It just wasn't a good situation. But I didn't want to put them together right away. I wanted the Orpingtons to get some weight on them. I wanted them to be a little closer to their adult stature so that we could kind of mitigate some of the bullying that might happen if they were tiny little pullets zipping around like crazy. Step 4, mixing and mingling. Initially, our plan was to finish the John Sussexes chicken tractor and move everybody in together at the same time at about 12 to 14 weeks for the Orpingtons. But as you all know, the John Sussexes stress-free chicken tractor was terribly stressful and cursed, and that didn't happen. Not to mention that Hurricane Hannah came barreling towards us, and we weren't sure if it was going to score a direct hit or not. And I didn't want to leave the little girls in a flimsy little run during a tropical storm or hurricane. We decided to move everyone together into Folsom Prison. And generally that worked all right. We did have some scuffles. We did have some posturing. We did have a pecking order issue, but nothing terrible. And I think a lot of it was mitigated by the steps we took prior to that. Step 5, frequent observation and wellness checks are really important. Frequently what will happen is a bird will receive some sort of injury and it signals a sign of weakness to the other birds, and that can be preyed upon. By doing frequent wellness checks, you can start looking for things that are alarming. We did have some little pecks here and there, but generally when I did my daily wellness checks of the Orpingtons, I didn't see any bald spots or blood or anything that was truly terrifying, so back into Folsom Prison they would go and everything was pretty much copacetic. The only real problems we had were related to food and the fact that the where I had the food placed was in a corner and there was not a way for the Orpingtons to get to the food without crossing in front of the Sussexes, whom they were terrified of. Pretty much all of the drama was related to pullets being terrified of everything. They're very flighty until they start laying their first egg. And Clementine, Marigold, and Jenny were no different than any other pullet I've ever experienced. So it's nighttime on our little homestead, and I don't know if you can see this, but all 6 girls are currently on the roosting bar. So I have to say that I think, despite all of my misgivings, our attempts to integrate the flock have been largely successful. Oh yes, now you're gonna jump down here because you see me and you think I'm gonna feed you. Will I do this again? I really hope so. I found brooding chicks to be incredibly rewarding. It was a lot of fun watching those little cheepy poofs grow up into actual chickens. In fact, Everett has already got his next batch picked out. It's just going to be a few years. We really enjoyed the whole thing, and we found that by following these steps of integration, it really wasn't as painful as we thought it might be. I really hope you found this video informative. Please click and subscribe, and I will see you next week.